friend of mine sent me a note, and he wants to clarify that John Podesta wasn't necessarily hacked. That would mean somebody directly got into his email. He was the victim of calling him a victim. Again, he used password for his password. He was the victim of what's called a phishing scam. That is, he gave all of his details out to somebody who'd set up a bogus account on the other end, and those are believed to have been Russians. They have in Leningrad, well, it's not called Leningrad anymore. I guess it's got a new name. It was called Leningrad when I was young. They have a place where they have a group of people who sit inside this building, and they spend all of their waking hours doing this. It's just part of Russian intelligence gathering. I wouldn't be surprised, because right now the Russia hearings have opened on Capitol Hill, Senate hearings. There was a news conference yesterday between Mark Warner, he's a Democrat out of Virginia, and one of his Republican counterparts, Richard Burr from North Carolina. They said during the course of this thing yesterday they were glad to open these hearings up, but they were both, and Warner might be one of the few Democrats who's come forward and said essentially they don't expect to find any collusion between Donald Trump's campaign and Russia. Wouldn't it be cool if all of a sudden the doors swung open and in walked Vladimir Putin and said, "I am here to tell you what happened. It's great pleasure to be here." Probably not likely anytime soon. I was listening to some of the conversation about all of this. Now, 2 weeks ago, Fox News, essentially fired Judge Andrew Napolitano, who claimed that he had sources telling him that what happened was the Obama White House, so it could keep its hands clean, it went to British intelligence and asked the Brits to gather intelligence on the Trump campaign, and then turned around and provided it to the Obama White House, saying, "Oh, look what we accidentally found." Remember, it was said he was suspended. He was essentially fired. Now that we're learning more about this, all of a sudden somebody at Fox, we claim we're not mainstream media, but we act just like them. I guess we better try to rehire Judge Napolitano. And he showed up yesterday on the air after a 2-week hiatus. He was on the air with Bill Hemmer yesterday morning, and then he was on throughout the day talking about this situation. And he claims he's going to stick by his original story. This is Judge Napolitano.
I do, and the sources stand by it. And the American public needs to know more about this rather than less, because a lot of the government surveillance authorities will expire in the fall, and there will be a great debate about how much authority we want the government to have to surveil us. And the more the American public knows about this, the more informed their and Congress's decisions will be.
Well, so no change then.
Correct.
And we'll see how the story plays out.
We will, yeah.
In time.
Yeah, I think a lot more is going to come.
American liberals are doing something akin to walking across the Snake River Canyon on a tight wire. It's a balancing act, because they're trying to impugn that Donald Trump shouldn't really be the president, and that it was some outside force, because, golly gee, Hillary Clinton was so warm and lovable and squeezable, everybody would have voted for her otherwise. They're trying to convince you that Trump shouldn't be the president so they can eventually come back and snatch that office away. But at the same time, they also are a little weary of what might be found in these hearings and what we may come to a conclusion with, because it could boomerang and then backfire, and they may have actually fallen off the tightrope at this point. Last night on Tucker Carlson's program on the Fox News Channel, Brit Hume was, in the 1980s when he was still working at ABC, was outed as being a conservative. And apparently you weren't supposed to like him. He was one of the few everybody knew, though, that the majority of people who were covering Washington at the time were just Marxist-Leninists. So what was the problem with Brit Hume trying to offer some balance? Hume was appearing last night with Tucker Carlson, and according to Hume, Democrats are on a fool's errand.
There are two other elements that have become part of this as well. One of them is the question of whether the Russians were acting in collusion with the Trump campaign, of which there is scant evidence so far, but a lot of allegations and a lot of suspicions voiced about that. And of course, the final element is this question of whether the United States intelligence agencies, having incidentally swept up the names and information from or conversations by certain American citizens, then proceeded to mishandle that information. The identities, of course, in situations like that, as your previous guests have mentioned, are supposed to be masked that is to say not revealed, not even revealed across the intelligence agencies, and it appeared that those constraints were not observed in some cases here.
Yeah.
That is what Devin Nunes has been talking about as the chairman of that committee.
We were just talking in the last hour of the program about how liberals will run around and claim settled science, settled science, settled science when it comes to to global warming, even though there never is anything such as settled science. That's why you still have people who are doing research. And yet, with no evidence, they all insist that Donald Trump and the Russians colluded to steal the election from their girl because, golly gee, every normal red-blooded American was just in love with Hillary Clinton. She's so handsome, after all. Truth will win out, according to Brit Hume, speaking last night on Fox.
The Democrats, of course, would like this to be about the allegations of collusion, and the Republicans would like it to focus more on the allegations of the misuse of intelligence against American citizens by the Obama administration. My sense about this is that this reminds me of a lot of congressional investigations that I've covered through the years, in which there's a lot of politics involved. It's kind of an adversarial proceeding, and on one side, one party tries to adduce information that helps their side of the argument, and the other party does the other thing, and out of that kind of adversarial proceeding, truth often emerges.
You've got the Democrats right now, and I'm not saying the Democrats are Nazis, but they're borrowing that old phrase attributed to both Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. And that is that if you tell the big lie often enough and just keep repeating it, eventually people will believe that's the truth. So the Democrats are running around screaming, Russia, 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 Russia. And they just hope that they can obscure things to the point and get people to believe this. And you've seen the polls actually shift in that direction. And when you've got ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and MSDNC, along with the New York Times and Washington Post, all chiming in and agreeing with this, that is helping spread the big lie from the propaganda ministry. Of course, they've managed to move the polls in that direction. But polling data, we don't govern the country on polls. We govern the country on laws and the Constitution. It's funny, when you see a poll that's favorable, Mika Brzezinski was talking to Cardinal Wuerl, Roman Catholic leader of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. on MSDNC a few years ago. And she said, but don't you know that 90% of Roman Catholics favor birth control? And he looked at her and he said, well, would it help you, Mika, if I told you that there are Roman Catholics who are in prison? We tell them not to commit crimes too, but they do it. Not all of them, we should point out. I mean, not even me. But he was making the point, you can't govern any institution on just the whims of the people who are involved. That's why we don't have, if we scrapped Congress tomorrow, and some people might say that's a wonderful idea, Bill, I'm glad you said it, and then decided we were going to govern the country just directly with having a daily poll on what we should do, we likely wouldn't be happy with the results. Tucker Carlson responding to his guest Brit Hume last night. Tucker says there is historical precedence, though, for the hysterical behavior of American liberals.
You know what it reminds me of? And you were, of course, at the center of this. 1993, you covered this. Republicans couldn't understand how anyone could have voted for Bill Clinton. They just couldn't make sense of it at all. And so all these theories arose about running drugs in and out of Mena Airport or killing people, rather than just addressing it directly, that he had a message they may have disagreed with, but that was resonant with voters. I think the Democrats still don't understand why Trump won. And so they've made up this incredibly elaborate explanation having to do with Russia that is psychologically satisfying, but maybe not politically helpful long term.
I'm not sure how deeply they believe it, but they'd love it. They'd love it to be true, Tucker, because they believe, based on things apart from this, that Donald Trump is basically an illegitimate president, a man who has no qualifications for the job, is an execrable person, and should not be the president.
It's called apocryphal. That means it could be true, but there's not necessarily a lot of evidence to say that it is. Pauline Kael, who was a film critic in 1972 working in New York City, was at a dinner party, and she said, I can't believe Richard Nixon won the election. I don't know anybody who voted for him. Liberals have that view about Donald Trump right now because they don't get out very much. And they feel, yesterday, after I posted a video to my Facebook page, and I had been talking about this before the program yesterday, how liberals can't seem to use logic and they govern themselves on emotions. I was posting this, and it got shared by a few other people, and then a liberal. You could tell right away what he was because his picture, his little thumbnail picture is there on his Facebook page. He looks like Mr. Peepers, Mr. Macho Wally Cox, who in real life was a little more macho than his characters that he played. Wally Cox had an upbringing in a small town in the Midwest, and his best childhood friend was a roughhouse named Marlon Brando. So the two of them were pretty rugged guys. This Wally Cox, though, looking fellow, chimes in about how dumb we all are as conservatives. First of all, not every conservative backed Donald Trump. You may recall that from last year's election. You may recall there was a lot of infighting among Republicans about this very same issue. You may recall that some of us, when it came to the primary season, well, I was supportive of 4 different candidates, Paul, Bobby Jindal, Ted Cruz, and Rick Perry. And I thought many other candidates also would have been better choices than Donald Trump. By the time we got to the Idaho primary last year, it was down to Cruz and Trump. I voted for Ted Cruz. But then I looked at the landscape and realized Trump was going to be the nominee, and I said, well, you've got Jill Stein, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton. Who would I best? And said, well, Bill, you could have chosen Gary Johnson. Yeah, smoke him if you got him. I wasn't sure that Johnson was my man, and libertarians could have done a lot better last year than go with that kook. The point of the matter is, I went with who I thought would be the best candidate, the candidate who wouldn't bankrupt this country by saying that we needed to put up more of these whirligigs all across the landscape to generate wind power. I went with a candidate who would support Israel. I went with a candidate who would tell North Korea, hey, you guys better not push it any longer because there's a new sheriff in town. That's who I decided to go with at the time. And all of you lefties out there who keep claiming that we're being deluded, that Trump was somehow in league with the Soviet Union, Russia today, back when it was the Soviet Union, liberals loved it, fellow travelers after all. The fact of the matter is you have no evidence. Mark Warner, a liberal fellow traveler, said as much yesterday during a news conference about the hearings. These hearings are just window dressing. And what will happen when they discover there really isn't anything there? Liberals will suddenly be demanding that they bring these to an end. Why? Because to save themselves the humiliation. Because if they can bring it to an end quickly, they can always hold at least to the conspiracy theory that indeed the Russians, including with Donald Trump, stole the election, which was rightfully Hillary Clinton's. Golly, I'm glad she's gone. Albeit, judging by the speech she gave a couple of nights ago, the threat of her having another return, the thing that wouldn't leave. 46 right now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a short break, but I'll take some of your telephone calls after the break on this subject in just a moment. I know there's little indication today that spring is here, but this is a brief pause, and the weather is going to be very, very nice by the middle of next week, according to most of the forecasts I'm looking at. Quick note, we'll be looking at temperatures back in the mid-60s in a few days. Weather is a service of Mountain Home Auto Ranch, located in Mountain Home. It's 46. Bill Colley with you. Also, this time of year, I've been telling you a lot about Western Visions, Inc. the last few weeks, and some of the wonderful work that they're doing here in the Magic Valley. But with spring here, too, as well, a couple of things I want you to note. Western Vision's principal, Russell Smith, he's got about 30 years' experience in designing and building custom homes as well. Actually, a little bit more than that. I don't want to make him feel old. We're the same age, but I like to feel that I'm still relatively young. And he's been designing and building custom homes throughout the last several decades. With springtime upon us, if you've been thinking of building this year, it would be an excellent time to give Western Visions a call and discuss your ideas for your new dream home. And I think that what you have to realize, too, as well, these are people who will work to incorporate what you have really into the natural beauty of this region. And if you'd like to know more, check out the website. The website is western-visions.com. Once more, that's western-visions.com. It's 9:23. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX at newsradio1310.com. Telephone number to reach our show today, 736-0300. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next.
Hi, Bill. Our congressperson should point out that Arkansas is the Clintons' home state where Bill was governor. If Clinton had done a great job as governor, she would have won Arkansas in a landslide. Arkansas and every state connecting borders with Arkansas voted for Trump.
And I have to tell you, I have friends who live in Arkansas. They were never Clintonistas. Never, ever Clintonistas. So mention 736-0300. You can also reach me by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Next caller joining us, you're on Top Story. Go ahead.
So you only voted for the guy that's going to take all that information and sell it. So all that privacy thing is out the window. That's what you voted for?
What are you talking about? Can you explain that in English? Hello? 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 Tough guy? Hello? Well, he's got to be worried about, INS and some of those people prowling his neighborhood, I suppose. 925, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio. I don't know, I could have voted for the liberals who would have told businesses across the country that they had to provide paid leave and force people to do all sorts of things, buy insurance. I voted for liberty in that sense. 925, you're up next. You're on the air on Top Story.
Hello?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is my first time calling in too. Just want to tell you I do appreciate the information you put out there. Just a couple quick things. I
Sure.
definitely agree with you when it came to Trump. He wasn't my number one pick, but I'm definitely glad he's in there.
Yeah.
And kind of back to the global warming nonsense. And I believe it was your show, had a gentleman on, was kind of explaining about, like, if you took all the man-made stuff and combined it together, how minuscule it was compared to what nature itself puts out into the atmosphere, And I just have to laugh because I remember several years ago about them saying that in 2016, 17, we'd have to explain to our children what snow looked like. And, well, I don't think I really had to do that this year.
Well said. Hey, thank you for the call.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too. Don't be a stranger. On the seafloor, and I saw this on TV a few years ago, and these things have existed as long as we've had a seafloor. In fact, there was a time, scientists say, millions of years ago when the Earth was, for a time, just a big giant snowball. Why did it eventually thaw? Well, there are these vents on the seafloor, and the inside of the Earth, the core, is warm. Well, hot. We have a great big magma chamber underneath our feet right now. All right, underneath my chair, I've got my feet sort of propped up on the ring around it. That heat has to be dispelled. And so there are these great big vents all over the ocean floors, and they're just, constantly boom, boom, and they're letting out not only heat but methane and other assorted gases that build up in the center of the Earth. Well, they're not captured within the oceans. They eventually make their way to the surface, and then they get into the sky and then the atmosphere. Those things play a role as well, and throughout history of the planet have played a role in all of this. Volcanoes, big volcanoes, Krakatoa and some of the others, have had far more deleterious effects on climate than anything man has been able to do. And this notion that somehow, if we just stop doing it all together in this country and starve the population, that the Chinese are going to say, we should do the same. They're trying to turn around a culture of starvation. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill. So it's looking to me like President Trump has, passed his executive orders trying to enforce illegal immigration and get rid of the lawbreakers. And now it's like there's these courts all over the country that are filing petitions. And anyway, they've essentially neutered Trump's executive orders and the law of the land. They're able to do this through the courts. And I'm wondering, what do you think that they're going to do the same thing with the environmental controversy?
Oh, they will. Sure.
Now, and so how, I'm asking you really seriously, what do you think? How are we, is America going to make any progress at all in the next few years with all of this litigation?
Neil Gorsuch. If we can get him approved early as next week, which could happen if they put aside the Democrats' filibuster, and thanks for the call, if we get him confirmed, we're going to have that guy on the Supreme Court that will slap down a lot of these lower courts that are trying to simply protect leftist viewpoints around the country. You know what's going to happen. To use the arguments they've been making on the travel bans from certain country, they're going to make the argument. You've got to make a point in some of these lawsuits when you file them that you are harmed by the government's action. So someone will come along and say, I have overactive sweat glands, and because of Donald Trump's new policy, it's going to be 85 instead of 81 at my house on average every day this summer. And my deodorant just doesn't work in that situation, and I'm going to stink, and nobody will like me. Oh, poor liberal. I will rule in your favor. Well, just get Gorsuch on the bench. And when we get there on appeal, these leftists and other assorted ne'er-do-wells will get slapped down. That's all. 9:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. By the way, I thought that one caller, I thought he was in jail in Rockville, Maryland right now awaiting trial, but that's a story for another day.